National does have to pull back all those seats that they lost in the red wave. Are they going to do that?
They'll win back a lot of them just by virtue of the fact that they're not at the low ebb anymore, all right? So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit for National to be able to pick up. They'll pick up a lot of those seats just by virtue of the fact that they won't be polling 24%, they'll be in the mid-30s, right? I guess the thing is, there's a difference between being stretched when you're in opposition and a difference between being stretched when you're in government, right? And so National lost a lot of those middle MPs in the last election, but it also didn't have to staff all these ministries. It didn't have to watch all these things. Now, the problem with Labour is that it does have a pretty shallow bench, right? I mean, you don't have a whole lot of Wayne Mapp types or Christopher Finlaysons who you can go to as those utility players who you can just fill those roles with, and that's why you have someone like Andrew Little, or before that Chris Hipkins, taking on
everything, ministers for everything. I want to talk a bit more about National, and so we're talking about inequity and inequality with Chris Bishop earlier. Rebecca was talking to him, and they're saying, do you get a sense?
I love the silence that he gave when she asked him about inequality. We all laughed because he had nothing to say about it. Right?
Oh, but yeah, okay. So if I take on a National's role here, they're saying that Te Aotearoa, housing and education are the ways and are the drivers to fill that, to address that kind of gap.
Of course it is, but there are umpteen other things, and actually what Māori people most look at is, I've got to pay some bills, I've got to pay my mortgage, I just got to get bread and butter on my table. So you can talk about all those things, but not making the link between the education and families having to pay debt, pay mortgage, pay a kai. And we have, in communities across the country, those are really suffering at the hard edge of poverty, and nobody's coming up with solutions to address those issues.
So you didn't hear anything there that would you believe that was going to address?
You'd naturally go to education. I would. I'm an educationist. Of course, I'd go to education. Of course, housing is an issue at the front of everybody's mind. But when we sort of talk about equity and inequity, you've got to drill down and say, where are the people that are really hurting right now? They're usually Māori communities, not always, but definitely Māori communities or Māori in communities that are suffering, and no, they can't make the connect. They're not making the connect.
Okay, look, Liam, I mean, what would you say to that? I mean, would you say that, focusing on, like Chris Bishop did, point to housing and education is the way in which National can say that they are addressing that kind of that inequity, that inequality?
Well, Chris Bishop really had a focus on long-term things, not exclusively, but he talked about, for example, the best, whatever it is, the Best Start program. It's not Best Start, whatever it is. And he talked about, the need to get education fixed and the need to get housing fixed and how those things would flow on. Those are long-term ambitions and they are the long-term fixes for everybody. Rebecca was pushed back on that pretty harsh. She asked for, what are you going to do?
What's the grand plan?
What's the grand plan?
Yeah.
But she also didn't want him to say anything that was simplistic, and that's the trap, right? So, so she wanted a simple solution that wasn't simplistic,
right?
And the National Party has to be very careful not to fall into that trap, right? The opposition, people aren't holding them to account for their existing situation from a political perspective only. They just have to seem like a government in waiting. People will give them people are willing to give them a chance because they might be better than the current lot.
Right. Okay.
One of the things they didn't address the fact that National helped cause the housing problem because they had such an open immigration policy, right? Because they had, when Key was in power, right? So they had a huge immigration policy. We allowed more and more migrants in, which was great for economy, great for business, not so good for housing. We didn't fix our housing issues. We still haven't fixed them properly yet. So the fact that he said today, we're all about housing, I'm like, well, you didn't actually say that you stuffed it up in the first place, right?
Well, but no political party ever says, oh, yeah, we've really got it wrong, sorry about that.
Yeah.
We're just going to say, let's look at the future.
I'm waiting and waiting for something from National to give us something substantive. There's nothing wrong with simplistic at all, but there's nothing substantive from them yet.
And there's nothing to be gained by having a shot at gangs and saying that is the solution to the problems of law and order in Aotearoa.
No way. Health inequities for Māori, right? So we had this huge debate earlier this week around the new health inequity tool that's being used. Quite rightly. Ethnicity is just one of the markers. Not all of them, is just one of five.
There was a focus, and there was a focus on...
And so Luxon talked about, we shouldn't have Māori and Pacifica shouldn't be on this, and so did Shane Reti, which is problematic because it actually doesn't show us that they understand that there is huge inequities for Māori and for Pacifica in our health system.
All right. Do they, or are they making a push into that area now because they are putting candidates into the Māori electorates?
They should. They absolutely need to speak to Māori. You know, one way to speak to Māori is to actually, and no one's doing it, is look at the East Coast and Hawke's Bay. They've been smashed by the floods, right? And they keep being smashed by the climate crisis.
Yeah.
A good way is to actually understand what they need and start to talk to them and bring some really good policy around how we will help those
Te Uroro, I can see that you're itching to jump in there.
Well,
should they be standing in the Māori seats? I mean, because they're talking previously about abolishing them, and now they are standing in them.
Yeah, well, that's what political leverage, one or both ways, happens. When you're in government, you want to appease to the big majority. And the thing about the time when Māori Party was in with John Key and Bill English was that you could say that they needed our votes for the purposes of maintaining power. On the other hand, you could say that actually they were ahead of their time a little bit, recognising that Māori could provide some serious solutions to some of the issues that were not that's where Whānau Ora came from.
And also we are seeing an increasing younger cohort of Māori voters, right, Liam? So National really has to see an opportunity there, don't they?
Well, there's a couple of things, right? So first of all, you know, they're not going to win those electorates. They're just
so
not.
What's the point?
Well, the point is there's two, right? So first of all, it's respectful, right? I mean, like, you know, you've got, you're a national party, you're a party that was meant to speak to the whole of the country, and, you know, if you deliberately don't stand candidates in seats, it's like writing them off, right? It's just wrong. And so the second thing is, you know, from a more sort of electoral point of view, you're going to pull across a few party votes. It's the party vote that counts.
Okay.
And then thirdly, you know, I mean, the thing is, look, the National Party, in theory, is committed to abolishing those seats, but only in the same way that the Labour Party is theoretically committed to state socialism. You know, it's a theoretical commitment only.
What you need to know about
they want the party vote.
What you need to know about the Māori electorates, right? Not in the last one, but the previous election. New Zealand First and National actually pulled more party votes, even though they didn't stand anyone, more party votes than the Greens, who did stand people. So if you stand, and quite right, democratically, all parties should be standing, and ACT should actually be putting people into those Māori seats as well.
And I have got to leave it right there. But thank you so much for all your korero this morning. Liam, Carmen and Te Uroro.